There are some horrors that should stay dead, but these are due a comeback. Hey there, adventurers. My name is Judd, and this is Short Rest Studios. Dungeons & Dragons has been around since 1974, and it's always had its share of weird, nightmarish, and cool monsters, some of which have not survived into modern times, but I think it's time these 20 forgotten monsters were resurrected for the sake of adventurers everywhere. Let's count them down. Number 20, the Spanner. Also known as a living bridge, the Spanner first appeared in the monstrous compendium Fiend Folio Appendix published by TSR in 1992 as part of 2nd edition AD&D. Originally created by a wizard to guard his tower, Spanners were virtually indistinguishable from an actual stone arch bridge. In fact, only a dwarf or someone with similar knowledge of stonemasonry or engineering could tell the difference, at least until they started talking. At some point, they escaped into the wild, so you never knew where you might encounter one. On the upside, they were curious, even friendly. They loved gossip, so as long as you talked to them, they were okay. But being made of stone, they were nearly indestructible, and if you pushed a Spanner too far, they pitched you over the side, which, depending on the height of the fall, could be pretty bad. At 19, we have the Carbuncle, basically a mischievous armadillo with a jewel in its forehead. The Carbuncle was part of the 1st edition AD&D Fiend Folio, published in 1981. These chaotic, neutral miscreants would try to persuade adventurers to help them with some task, promising that gem in their heads as a reward, and they'd tag along with the party and use their premonitions and telepathic powers to sow division in the party. And sometimes they'd even help other monsters lure them into traps, and nobody really knows why. If you caught on and decided to fight a Carbuncle, they weren't aggressive and probably wouldn't be a difficult opponent, but you can only get its gem if it was given willingly. When you killed a Carbuncle, the jewel dissolved. They could be a fun, chaotic addition to a straightforward dungeon crawl. Number 18 is the Formian. Formians are centaur-like ant people. Their colonies consisted of exactly the kind of social hierarchy you'd expect, workers all the way up to queens. Workers weren't a big deal, but there were also warriors who were more of a threat. And of course, a massive queen who couldn't move, but she could cast a bunch of spells. The Formians' whole MO was to spread their colonies all over the world, so it was kind of like finding ants in your house. If there's one, there are a whole bunch somewhere, and they're going to get into your cereal. Coming in at 17 on our countdown of 20 forgotten D&D monsters, the Blade Spider. This 8-legged horror came to us in 4th edition, and it was like Freddy Krueger and the other mother from Coraline had a love child, a giant red spider with knives for feet. These were just beasts, but they were big enough to ride. They could also be found in the Underdark and were favored pets of drow. Some driders even commanded packs of them in battle. I see these guys as a great way to add a little surprise to your Underdark adventures. Your PCs think they're being attacked by run-of-the-mill giant spiders, and then they get their faces sliced off. Number 16 on the countdown is the Disenchanter. This weird little creature came from the 1st edition Fiend Folio as well, and it managed to survive all the way to 3rd edition. It's described as camel-like with a trunk like an elephant, but it was basically an oversized anteater that, instead of eating ants, sucked the magic out of magic items. If it got too close, that +1 longsword was now just a longsword. Disenchanters weren't aggressive unless you had magic items on you, and then, well, look out. There were uses for their hair, blood, brains, and essence, whatever that is. And while they may not seem like much of a threat, they were generally viewed as a net positive. They were the source of at least one plague of disenchanters. Ranking 15th is the Alkada. This one is just plain goofy, and I love it. These egg-shaped creatures, also known as wingless wonders, were brought to us courtesy of Ed Greenwood, creator of the Forgotten Realms, in Dragon Magazine number 40. They had wild magic and psionic abilities. Some of them were wizards that were trapped or in disguise or somehow reincarnated into this ridiculous form. They were clumsy, stupid, and with a mouth and tentacles on top of their heads. Weird. They had an insane number of abilities like an anti-magic shell and regeneration, but they also had no fear or caution to temper their curiosity, which was mainly about whether something was good to eat. So they were pretty easy to kill, but they sure would be fun to drop into the totally wrong environment. I mean, they were known to wander oblivious through dragons' dens and battlefields. Number 14 is the Digester. Digesters come to us courtesy of the 2003 3.5e Monster Manual, and they're gross. It kind of looks like a weird tentacle-faced 5-foot-tall dinosaur with a nozzle in its forehead, and they were always hungry. The markings on its rough hide made it good at camouflaging itself in the forest until some unwitting prey, like your adventuring party, happened by. Then it would charge you, spray you with acid from its forehead nozzle, and beat and claw you with its giant bird legs until it could spray you again. I assume that since it's called a digester, that's basically stomach acid it sprayed you with, meaning it puked on you before eating you. Coming in at lucky 13 is the Mihstu. Hailing from 1983's Monster Manual 2, the Mihstu was a 6-foot diameter cloud of mist that could change its shape to move through even the tiniest cracks. They were almost never encountered anywhere but the elemental plane of air, but if your party did wind up fighting one, it could shape its body into tentacles with razor-sharp talons or envelop your body and drain you. They were no joke, and considering they could probably get through any door, there was nowhere to hide. 12th on our list is the Thought Eater. Now, I know that sounds like just another name for an intellect devourer, but these guys have been around a long time, first appearing in the original D&D supplement, Eldritch Wizardry, the same book that introduced us to Vecna. These odd monsters were invisible to material creatures until they died. And depending on who you ask or which edition you find them in, they either looked like a starving platypus or a cat-like bird or a bird-like cat. Thought Eaters weren't very intelligent, but they could sense psionic activity, move through walls, and absorb another creature's psionic power, among other things. They weren't even terribly difficult opponents, but they would make for some creepy flavor in the right environment. In the number 11 spot, we have the Wereshark. I'm gonna be honest, I really wanted to make this rare lycanthrope that was found in every D&D edition through 3rd the number 1 on this list. Why? Because a person who turns into a shark, man, that's the coolest person on the planet. That is not a curse. It's a gift. Weresharks could take human, fully shark, and hybrid forms. In their human forms, they were always huge brutes who had some scar or maiming injury that disappeared when they transformed. And of course, they passed on their curse by biting. Maybe that's why they all had scars. They were territorial and an absolute pain to any aquatic life forms. They loved to claim sunken treasure ships. They had heightened senses, they were vicious and strong. Even in human form, a wereshark could rip your arm off, and sometimes they even packed together, but they'd always protect their territory to the death. Can you imagine finding an undersea treasure guarded by a pack of weresharks? I truly believe fun builds community, and I can't build this community alone. Please consider joining the Adventurers Guild at patreon.com/shortreststudios. You can become integral to keeping the cameras rolling on this channel. And to show you my gratitude, you get access to a guild-only Discord channel, guild member shoutouts, and even quarterly adventure seeds to fuel your further TTRPG adventures. Head to patreon.com/shortreststudios and help me make more fun and grow the Short Rest Studios community. We are at the halfway point, adventurers. At number 10, we have the Mohrg. No, not that Mohrg. Mohrg, coming to us in October 2000 with the publication of the 3rd edition D&D Monster Manual. Mohrgs were the risen corpses of people who were shockingly evil even when they were alive, like serial killers, mass murderers, or genocidal dictators. The worst of the worst. They could only be raised by either their own evil will or the most powerful magic wielders, liches and the like, and they looked as horrible as they were. They appeared emaciated, even skeletal, with a bared ribcage full of bloated, foul-smelling, squirming internal organs. Mohrgs were faster than zombies, smarter than ghouls, and very stealthy. Add their paralyzing tongue and your adventurers were under serious threat. If you needed an undead monster that was scary, incredibly disturbing, and a beast in combat, the Mohrg was it. Now for our number 9 monster, the Dream Vestige. Ah, Dream Vestige, we hardly knew ye. They were part of the 3.5 edition supplement Libris Mortis, the Book of Undead, and we never saw them again. They were swirling gray mists with multiple faces that would stretch and twist and dissolve along with the vapor. And those faces, they were actual souls whose faint voices could be heard laughing, despairing, panicking. Dream Vestiges were always hungry, and they'd form tentacles to grab and feed on the living. They were formed by combining hundreds of nightmares and infusing them with necromantic energy. They were incorporeal, so you could only hurt one with spells or magic weapons or supernatural abilities. And to actually kill one, you had to exploit the wrath and self-hatred that formed them, which would cause them to dissolve. Terrifying. Coming in at number 8, the Falxugon. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea how to pronounce that. Let's call it the Harvester Devil. 5th edition has its share of fiends, demons, and devils, and D&D always has, hello Satanic Panic. But these were the deal makers. Harvester Devils were masters of convincing foolish mortals to sign away their souls for some fleeting status or pleasure. And that's not the only resemblance to the stereotypical devil. They could appear in an appealing human form, but their natural form? A humanoid in luxurious clothes with glowing red eyes, sharp teeth, tiny horns, glowing hooves, and a red prehensile tail. Harvester Devils were tough, capable fighters with a handful of powerful spells and poison daggers that would leave you cursed, but they'd rather win through persuasion and deceit. But there was one thing that made them nearly unkillable. A clause in the Pact Primeval, the document that allowed devils to harvest mortal souls, made it almost impossible for anyone on the material plane to hit a Harvester Devil unless they struck first. And if you did manage to land a blow, you were debilitated as punishment for breaking the pact. Harvester Devils are the perfect bad guy if you want your players to confront a devil's bargain and all that goes along with it. The 7th monster on our countdown is the Deepspawn. 2nd edition AD&D brought us this 14-foot diameter rubbery ball with 6 20-foot long tentacles, 3 of which ended in toothy mouths. Oh, and while it only used 3 or 4 at a time, it also had more than 40 retractable eye stalks. The Deepspawn would attack with all those tentacles from a position that was easy to defend and to escape, after burying itself to lie in wait for your hapless adventurers. But the thing that made the Deepspawn a real challenge was it could make a copy of any creature on the material plane. A functional copy. It just needed to eat the original. If it had access to the dead and dying, say on a battlefield, it could make a copy every 3 days, though it usually took longer. The copies did retain some of the memories and abilities of the original, but they were also completely loyal to the Deepspawn that spawned them. Drop a Deepspawn into a forgotten dungeon a couple of years before your players get there, and it could be full of whatever monsters you want to put there. Number 6 on the list, the Wemic. Yes, it's a lion centaur, and the 12-year-old in me thinks that's amazing. The Wemic first appeared in 1983's first edition Monster Manual 2. Imagine the fierce, graceful body of a lion combined with the upper body of a humanoid. They were larger and stronger than humans, capable of incredible pouncing leaps, and had powerful claws on their feet and hands. They were a proud, nomadic people who lived in patriarchal prides, often dismissed as barbaric and uncivilized, but there's surprisingly rich lore of faith and worship, harmony with nature, and magic around these creatures. Plus, while they weren't usually looking for a fight, Wemics were skilled tacticians and could wield weapons while also using their claws to devastating effect. You didn't want to get on their bad side. An encounter with a Wemic pride wouldn't just be challenging combat. It could be an opportunity for your party to roleplay interaction with a complex culture and find out what they're really made of. All right, we've reached the top 5, I can finally count with one hand, where things really start to get good, or bad, depending on your perspective, I guess. Here's the Hive Mother. 2nd edition brought us this beefed up beholder, but we haven't seen it since 3.5. Yes, it was a beholder, but it could magically dominate other beholders, even death tyrants. It was much larger, more intelligent, and just as, if not more, fanatical. Some had eye stalks and some didn't, but they all had huge mouths, the better to eat you with. They may or may not have had the beholder's signature eye rays, but the Hive Mother's central eye generated an anti-magic cone, suppressing all magic and supernatural effects within 240 feet. Coming in 4th, the Sussurus. For my money, this is one of the creepiest monsters on the countdown. It's an aberration that came from 1st edition, but hasn't been seen since Monster Manual 3 in 2004. Sussuri were sort of ape-like in shape, only they didn't have heads. And they might have been made of plant material, like a shambling mound, but they had this exoskeleton that was filled with gaps that sucked in air to make a constant droning sound. And that sound could pacify the undead, rendering them completely motionless. They were solitary and usually peaceful, but they did not like undead or fire. And their claws allowed them to grapple enemies, which they would then rip to shreds. At number 3, we have the Avolakia. Coming to us from the 3rd edition Monster Manual 2, these are by far the most disgusting monster on the list. Imagine the worst, grossest parts of an octopus, a worm, and a bug. Now put those together, make it 10 feet long and 500 pounds. It was gray, coated in yellow slime, and moved around on 6 tentacles, each of which ended in an eye. Oh, and it also had 8 spider arms with little claws. And they had 3 mandibles that could pop out of their heads. And the best part, they smelled like a dead body. I feel like the guys who designed this, yes, they were all dudes, just thought of every gross thing they could and mashed them all together. They were evil and intelligent and seemed to think of creating undead as a hobby. They could cast a bunch of spells and polymorph into humanoid form. And in that humanoid form, their voices could hypnotize you. These subterranean shapeshifters were tough and disgusting. In the runner-up spot is the Spirit Warrior. If you ever wanted your D&D Spelljammer campaign back in the day to be like an episode of Voltron or the Power Rangers, well, here you go. The Spirit Warrior was a 20 to 30 foot tall mech suit made from an undead bug. Yep. There were different kinds, but they all had at least 2 clawed hands, sticky feet, and wings. They had ridiculously huge longswords and sometimes massive bows. They could bite you or grapple and crush you, and some could change color like a chameleon, scream at you to cause sonic damage, jump incredible distances. Some had quote-unquote stingers that could shoot alchemical fire at you. I'll be honest, I kind of want one. All right, adventurers, are you ready for the number 1 monster on our countdown of 20 forgotten D&D monsters that need to come back? This one is the Platinum Dragon. What is D&D without dragons? They're in the name. Then why have we not seen a Platinum Dragon since 2E? And before you say anything, yes, Bahamut is a Platinum Dragon, Fizzban, blah, blah, blah. But Bahamut is also a god. I'm not talking about a god, just a dragon. That is the archetypal metallic dragon. Good aligned, huge, even for a dragon, and incredibly powerful. Their scales are platinum, but they radiate this powerful light that can make it impossible to tell what color the scales actually are. There's really not much known about platinum dragons, probably because they are, of course, extremely rare. Only 3 have ever been known to exist, and one of those is Bahamut. But the fact that they are so rare that there's this confusion when you see one because you can't tell their color makes them incredibly interesting to me. So does the fact that Bahamut is the only known platinum dragon to have wings. All dragons have a mystery and a majesty about them, but I think a platinum dragon, huge, wingless, kind of unknowable, would present a truly engaging encounter to your players and would offer you a deep well of adventure options. Those are 20 forgotten D&D monsters that need to come back, adventurers. What do you think? Drop me a comment, and if you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and consider supporting the channel by joining the Adventurers Guild at patreon.com/shortreststudios or by hitting the join button right under this video. If you love classic monsters, get some DM tips for running some of the most loved or hated in this playlist, and I'll see you next time on Short Rest Studios.